session is about how do we work with the database. So essentially what we have done so far is we have collected data from outside world. That is, one is the news, and one is the JSON um, input that we collect for all the COVID related stuff. So we have two inputs from two various completely independent sources, and then what we are trying to do is we are trying to aggregate those two, and then we are making a report out of it. Okay, so in yesterday's class we learned about how do we make sure that things don't break, and then we also learned about how do we unit test our code or from the project point of view, and then we also did an exercise on to identify the critical things for a couple of the modules, and then we also discussed about logging and stuff like that. So logging, anyways, you can do it on your own, but important thing is to make sure that your basic requirement is satisfied. Yes, that is fine, but is it good to give it to customers or give it to the outside world? So until you kind of make your own thing and it is working, so that is like in your garage and you are happy with the output and it works for you. If it doesn't work, you will try to hack it out and then try to make it work. But when you give it to outside world, so outside world operations are not in your hands. So maybe inputs are totally different, and the expected outcome, the load, and all these things can change in the outside world, and we need to write code in order to handle those things. So that is about what we discussed yesterday. So this was the assignment. So this is like specific assignment for specific sessions. So this is like this gives you an idea about what we discussed, like brainstorming, and then this is your task to do. Okay, it's the same thing that we did in the class, and then you just need to imitate that. Try to do it on an independent fashion, and then if you are stuck, go back to the video and try to find out where you are stuck, or else if you are not able to pass through it, just ping me or just send me a mail or text, whatever it is, so I can help you out. Okay, so that is about yesterday's class, about making the code, your garage code, into a production quality code. So in today's class, we will learn about how to work with databases. So the reason that we need to work with databases is that most of the projects will have some sort of reporting. We covered that, and some sort of input from outside world. We have covered that. And usually you'll be working with some kind of database that is to store the data that we have already processed, and look it again when the when it is required. So database is actually it's happening in our day-to-day lives. So one of the examples is that if you're writing a diary, it's kind of maintaining the log of your day-to-day life, and you can look back at what has happened in that moment, and your all the chatting, all these things are like ordered in certain fashion, so that you can go back and look at your chats and when was it sent and things like that. So we have data, and then we have also metadata related to that data. And what is a metadata? We will see in a while. So we have seen Excel sheets already, and it is also you can imagine, you can roughly equate it to database, because we store data in tabular format. So we will look at what is the need of database. Why can't we simply store on a file? What is the advantage that we get out of databases? And so that we set the context, and coding is actually the small part of it. So we have studied in our previous class that our system, basic system, is made up of RAM and then we had a hard disk, and within hard disk we stored the data somehow. And the reason that we store the data on the hard disk is for the persistence memory. That means once you switch off the system, the RAM is gone, and then you go back to the hard disk and look at your data. So that is a simple thing. Now we want to store data in a certain ordered format. So in your if you store data in a text format or any PPT format or whatever that is useful for you, so it is only useful for you. So that means only the creator knows how the data is organized. But in order to work with several interdependent systems, or in order to express the data in a certain fashion, that is in an ordered format, we need to keep that in an order. So that order is achieved by keeping that in a table format. So we have seen our data that is coming in from a JSON. So we had JSON from input, and we had a lot of states, and within each of the states there are nested dictionaries, and each of these dictionaries had contained something like active cases and disease cases and a lot of other things. So what we have done is we have extracted this state name and the active cases, and we have tried to put it in a dictionary. That means we have just filtered that. So now, say for example, I want to look at previous data. That means in March, in March on a certain date, say on March 20, what was the active cases at that moment. But our API only serves the data which is at this moment. That means at in today's moment. So we do not have a way to go back and look at the old data in the given API. So what we can do is we can extract this data and keep this in a file. So how do we keep that in a file is in an organized manner. So if we can keep it in an Excel sheet, and we can simply open that Excel sheet and look back. So our basic need is satisfied. That means you can go back to the data and find it out. But now you need to make much more things on top of that. For example, you need to take this data and maybe draw a graph out of this. So now we have a computer program or a computer module. Module 1 is communicating with another module, and then there are several different constraints now. So whether this module is authenticated or given access to all the rows of the database. Does he need that all the full access, or does he require only certain access, or does the program require only the read access or the write access? So all this kind of access level things can be done using a database. So that is why we do not use simple file, and we can use a database. So initially a long time ago, when databases were coming up, so all the companies like Oracle is the biggest database vendor, and then they came up with something called as SQL. SQL is nothing but it's a query language. Why it is called a query language is because that data is stored in tabular format, row by row, just like in our Excel sheet, and we can write queries. We can write simple commands to add data, that is insert data, and second extract data, and we can also do something called as join, and there are several operations in databases. So we'll not look into all the database operations. What we'll learn is we will just learn to how to insert data into database and how to extract data out of databases, because database itself is a one semester subject. So it has a lot of things. The basic thing that you need to understand is one table can be linked to another table. This is also called as relational models. For example, your student database can be linked to lecturer database, so that student and the lecturers have a relationship. and that relationship is like which class he is subscribed to, or which class he is going to attend. So this kind of all the logical things you can do in the database operations. So once you know about the data and how the data is collected, you can create tables and create relationships out of it, and then play around with the data. Okay. So this is about how the data is stored and why there is a necessity of a database. Why not simply we dump the data on the hard disk? So in typically in a production, or typically in any website, what do we do is, database is a separate entity. That means our data be uh, should not be mixed with other logic. So that is why we have a separate database and database connections and all these things. So typically what happens is, uh, so this is your system. So it looks something like this. Okay. So yesterday I just drew this. The thing that you're seeing in your right side is this part. Let me change the color. Some color. Okay. So this entire thing is running on one system, and your code which accesses the database is running on the other system. So why do we need this kind of structure in typical production system? Is because we need to separate the data from the actual system for security reasons. Because if you get access to, yeah, your this system, and it is possible that if you have a database in the same system, then it is open for everyone. So you just expose all the data that you have collected with a lot of hard work. It's gone. So that is why the server database is hosted on a separate server. So we have a file now. The what is the necessity of having a server? You can simply open the file and read and write, right? So the reason is, once you have a database as a file on a system, so you cannot simply directly copy paste that complete file. So you need, say for example, I have access only to the news table. So one of the sheets in the Excel sheet, like you can imagine. So I am authorized to only look at news. So I am not authorized to look at this data. So if you simply pass entire database into another system, so that is again a security violation. So in order to do that, what we typically do is, how the databases are typically hosted is, it is hosted on a server. On that server will give you the data only what you ask for and what you are authorized for. That is why there is a requirement of server. So this is for authentication, authorization, and then instead of serving the entire data, you serve only the part of data. So that is the whole idea of why we run that on a server. So server is once you install the database, first thing is you need to download the database and install it. Say for example, there are several databases. The popular ones are MySQL DB. This is an open source DB. There is Oracle MySQL, and then there is Postgres, which is an open source Postgres, and then in Python there is a lightweight database called as SQLite, SQLite 3. So there are like tens of or maybe even hundreds, I don't know. So there are several databases, and each database, for a small project it doesn't matter which database you use, but as and when the data grows, it needs to be strong, and it needs to be efficient, and all these things come into picture. So we need to understand what is each database providing, and then we need to choose that particular database and do that. So okay, now we have the server. Let me just get rid of this. We have the server. So now the server is running. So once the server is running, we need to somehow connect to this. server. So that is our next challenge. So we are moving from why file is not necessary to store the data. We move to databases. Now after databases, why it needs a server? It needs a server because we kind of host it and we kind of give the data which is necessary. Okay, so for that particular partitioning access, we need server. So once we have the server, so what is the challenge now? You need to connect to the server and then extract the data out of it. So this is the next challenge. So how is that possible that the database is PostgreSQL or MySQL or whatever it is, and you write code in Python or C++ and all these things. How does this code connect to this? All right. So that is the question. So a simple thing is what you without forget about the code. Let us for a moment let us forget about the code. How do we access the database? Okay. So since this is running on a particular server without any code, how do we access and how do we run SQL queries on top of it? Okay. So we log into system. First thing is we log into this particular system which is hosting the DB, and then we check if that server is up and running. If it's not up and running, you need to bring that you need to run commands and bring that up. I'll just show you on one of my Linux systems. And then you need to send queries inside that. That means you need to create database, and you need to create tables out of it, and then maybe you need to insert it, just like in our Excel sheet report processing class. We created Excel workbook. That is something like we are creating a database. First thing is you need to create a database. Let me choose red color. First thing is you need to create a database. This is nothing but to create a file, just a file on the hard disk. So second thing is to create tables out of it. Okay, that means in Excel sheet we create sheets, right? So that those things can be roughly mapped to tables. So we have different sheets, and in databases we have different tables, and in these tables we have data inside that. Okay. So that is how we try to log into running database, and then we try to if there is no database, create a database, and then if you of course if it's a fresh database, you need to create your tables and all these things. Before that, you need to plan how does your data is stored. So that is what is done here in this part. We have data from JSON. So this first one. So this data, I need to know, okay, how should I store that in database so that for my access it becomes easy. So I just made up tables saying that, okay, in this date, because I need date wise, in this date this is the state name and this is the active cases. So on March 20th there are several states. So one of the states is like Karnataka, and then active cases were something like 200. So similarly there are a lot of other states. Okay. So I store this. The reason that I'm storing this is because I need to go back and look at on a certain date what is the active cases on a particular state. So once I design this data table, I have a raw data, and then I'm putting in a table format. So of course you can depending on your requirement, you can add more columns, maybe active cases, disease cases, and then again one more column such as whether if that state is somehow that state is split into two states, maybe you kind of add one more metadata saying that, okay, this is old state or something like that. So like that you can keep on adding the columns and things like that. And second table that we are creating is from the news. So why do we require news? Because I need to go back to a certain date and then look at that particular news and look at that headline. So this is I have just created two tables now for our purposes, and just to get around the idea of how the database is created and stored, since we already know and familiar with these two input data that we are getting and we are processing it. Okay, so this is about how you can, without code, you can access the data. So you log into a server and then there are some queries, and you run the queries, you create tables and things like that. Okay, so that is how you do without code. But now, okay, since the server is running, you logged into a system. So similarly, what we should do is, uh, from the code, we need to somehow connect to this database. So how do we connect to this database? So all the languages. So whether it is Java or Python or C++, whatever. So you might have, if you have heard about Java programming a little bit, so you might have heard about JDBC, and then such terminologies are nothing but they are actually the drivers which connect to the server. So people write code to connect this to a database. So what are the things that you require to connect to database? One is your maybe username, password, and then your IP address of that particular system, and then the port. So if you have this particular information, you can simply log into that system and extract the data. Similarly, in the code, we can use such drivers, and then we access the data. Okay, so these are all the constraints. Stepwise we have dissected that, okay, why file is not used and why server is used, and why, how do we access that without the code, and how do we access with the code. So with this code, so the basic thing that you require is username, password, and all these things, and then you pass that as a parameter to a function. It will automatically connect, and it will give you something called as a cursor or a terminal, invisible terminal. So you can use that cursor and send commands to that, just like how you log into database and send commands. So let me just show you on one of my Linux machines. Okay, this is my Linux machine. Okay, so I have hosted a MySQL server in this particular server. So I'm running a instance of operating system on top of my Windows operating system. So this is like a completely different system. So in this system, there is a MySQL database running, and then in fact you can I think okay, this is how you log into your MySQL server. Now you have logged into this MySQL server. So this is my server, and I have logged in from here, from my code part. Okay, from this server where I write the code. Okay, now I'm not using code, I'm just directly logging into that and looking into that. So so this is how I have created some tables. So those commands I just put out here. For example, yesterday I created a database called as COVID project. Let me show the databases. So this is the database name is there are a lot of default databases. These are default databases. This is what I created yesterday. So this is the database name, and in fact you can say that, okay, use this particular in current context, you can use this particular database. Okay, so this is, now you are like whatever the commands you run, it will be run on top. This is the target database. Okay, so you can run something like I have created tables already, so you can run some commands to look into the tables. Okay, so those are like let me create one sample table for you. So this is like create table. State cases is already created. I'll just name it as state cases 2 just for our now we have created the table. In fact, you can look into there are a lot of commands in SQL. You can list out the tables, you can list out the data inside that and all these things. Okay. So this is how you typically do it from the command line. So now we need to do the same thing in from the code. So from the code, how do we do it? We use a database driver. So first thing is database should be up and running. Okay. So let me show the code here. So in Python, okay, that is about the concept about how the server is organized and how the database is hosted and things like that. In Python, there is a lightweight database which makes it easy for us to write simple programs and without thinking much about authentication and all these things. Okay. So what this Python SQLite 3 database does is SQLite is nothing but it's a light SQL database. So you can do a POC and stuff like that. So the concept is the same thing. The only thing that differs in SQLite is that you do not have to let me change that. You do not have to host a database. It is just a simple file here. No database is hosted on a server. You can simply create a table, something like covid.db. So inside that, all the tables and all these things you can create as and when you need, and you can simply dump it as a file and use it. So it is made simple. That is because you don't need a separate server to host and all these things. So, but the concept is same. From the code, you connect to this database, that is your SQLite database, and then you run the commands using the code. Okay. So these commands are actually almost similar in all the databases. So SQL is one of the ways to realize databases. In fact, there are a lot of other languages which does, but SQL is so popular, just like our JSON, that all the databases support query languages. Okay. So that is about the SQLite 3. So the library name is SQLite 3. So this gives us very flexible mode of operating with databases. So but you need to understand this concept and then keep that in mind, but because in your projects maybe you could be using PostgreSQL, maybe you're using Django, and then Django has certain drivers to be installed and then it connects to the database. The concept wise it is the same thing. So there is a server and you need to connect some if you're testing on your own system, maybe your database is also running on your local PC and you're connecting to it. But the whole idea is there should be a server which is running, and then you need to connect it using your authentication parameters. So let us look at our code, how our simple SQLite is used. So I wrote until yesterday we had these 4 modules. I have removed all the other code. I just put project code here. Okay. We saw all these things. I created one of the additional folder called as database, because like right now what we are doing is we are trying to insert a feature. That means we are trying to have a database feature. That means we can store the data that we have in our hand into a database. So it's like inserting a feature into our project. So how do we insert a feature? So now first we create a module, separate module. Yes, I have created a module. Then inside that I have created a sub module. This is database.py, which has a file, and each of this in this file I have created functions. Okay, such as, what are these functions? These functions are nothing but interfaces. Now if you go back to our picture, our picture here. If you go back here, this is nothing but, let me just maximize this. Okay, this is nothing but what we are essentially doing is we are just inserting one more module here called as database db, and then we are going to connect it to the reports using there are some functions that I have written. To insert, I have written something called as insert row or something like that, and to show extract the data and just to display, there is another function called as get rows. So these two functions I wrote it yesterday because it's not possible to write all the queries and do it live because it takes a lot of time. So I have written code, so I'll then explain that. So these are the interfaces which I am exposing from this particular module, which is now I am just plugging in that module to existing system. Okay, so this is just for your visualization purpose. Okay, let us go back to code now. So we have created this database folder, we have created this file, this file. So what is the first thing that we did? Conceptually we need to create a database. So this is how you kind of create a database, connect to a database. Actually, if there is no database, SQLite automatically creates one database with the file name that you are passing here. So this is just a file name, so I'm passing that file name here. And then as I told you, once you create a database connection, so this is something like connect is like is a interface, is a driver which connects to your database that you have just created. Okay, so once you have this connection, now you have an invisible terminal or very invisible cursor. That cursor is this one. So once you call this function, you get a cursor. So why do you need a cursor? You need a cursor to send out SQL commands. So SQL commands are nothing but what I just did. So this is one of the SQL commands. So create table is a command, and this is my state name, sorry, table name. And then we need to say, if I have a table like this, if I have a table like this, I need to tell what kind of data that is going to sit in the in this column. That means if I say date, so is it a text or date or whatever. So we can make it as a simple text in our context. Actually, there are particular objects called as date, which automatically checks the format of date and all these things. But there are several just like our data types in our first class, right? Int text means it consumes 4 bytes, and bool is for true or false and all these things. Similarly, database also has what kind of column it needs to be there. So that is why whenever we are creating the table, so this is actually the command. This is the same command that I showed it here. Same command is put in as a string. So this is a string, a variable which carries this string. So you can name a string in either like a doc string, because you can in doc string you can do multi-line comment. You can use doc string as a multi-line comment. Okay. So this is just a command. So you keep that command in a variable, and then you execute that command. That means you just execute means you are pressing enter here. So this is you made this command, and then you pressed enter. So that is similar to execute. So once it executes, it creates the table, and we need to commit it. So once you are actually inside the command prompt, so whatever you do is like you're operating directly on the database because you're manually logged in. Okay. So that is automatically saved once you create a table. But you need to also tell that, okay, now I have these are my commands, and I need to commit this. That means I need to save this. So especially this is most important, especially when you are inserting some data into it. Okay. So these are the commands to insert a row. For example, I can simply do insert this into uh, into the database. Okay, so we'll see that in a while. So how we insert and how it looks. So if you simply run this command, you will create an entry just like in our Excel sheet. Here you can create, it's like you create an entry. The ID is we don't have to pass ID because SQL automatically creates one of the columns called as ID. So that is for unique purpose. That means you can use a certain column name as a constraint. That means you should not duplicate it or something like that. So in such cases you can specifically tell that do not use ID as a key. Use here I'm using date um, as unique. That means I do not want duplicates for that particular day. That is why I'm using that text or date as unique key. That means if you try to insert two rows having the same date, it will fail. So that failure is handled in exception, that we'll see in insert command. So insert command, so now we have the code which can shoot the command. That is because we have created a connection. This is a driver and this connects to the database, and it gives us a cursor. From this cursor you can now type in the commands using the commands, and you can make it as a string, and you can simply pass that string to execute function. Okay. So this is one time activity. So you can simply run this one time, because you don't need to create table for every now and then, because once you have the database, then it is the matter of inserting the rows. Okay, so this is that is why this is one time activity, and then I have exposed interfaces only for inserting the rows. Now let us look at inserting the rows. So inserting the rows is the same thing. So you have already a database. Say for example, this is a database, and you need to connect to it. So existing database. So once you connect to existing database, it gives us the cursor. From the cursor, you are going to shoot the command. So what you are trying to do essentially here is you are trying to make commands out of the inputs that we are generating. We have generated data, and from that data you need to create commands. So this is the command format, and you need to create that command, because whatever is coming inside from the function is actually a variable. It is not a fixed thing, so you need to convert that into commands. Okay, so that is about insert row. Actually insert row is only single command, so this particular code is just to handle the error and commit it. So one of the most easy or simple mistakes that people do is they insert the row but they forget to commit it. Commit is nothing but just like pressing Ctrl S in your Excel sheet or any file. It commits to the database. That means it writes onto the hard disk. So this is an important function to remember. So basically you shoot a command and you save it. That's all. Okay. If there is any error, that particular error is handled in the exception block. That's all. So once you are done with the insertion, you just close the connection. That means you just like here in my I have connected. So dot close is nothing but I will say quit. So it says bye. Okay. So that is nothing but quit here or close here. Okay. So that is like closing the connection. Okay. So now we are looking at parallelly so how the database looks and things like that. Now let us try to see how we have inserted how we are using these interfaces in our existing code. Okay. So what I'm trying to insert is date, state name, and active cases, which we have already extracted, and we are now sending a mail. Before sending mail, I just need to store it in the database so that I can look back whenever that is required. Okay. So I have used it here. insert rows here. So we saw in our from our first skeleton class, skeleton code class, we created skeleton code. First step, second step, third step. We got the data here. Okay, fine. Now we are trying to send the data in this code. So we are just making this code is nothing but it is from the dictionary. It is making it as a text. So before making it as a text, what are we getting? We are getting the link and the headlines from the news. Okay, let me just get into drive note so that we are on the same page. So now I am not worrying about how the database works, because I have exposed an interface here. This is the interface that we created from this module. So that is inside here. So this module is connected here and this is exposed here. So now I am making that you making use of that in reports module. Okay, so that is nothing but this reports module. Okay, same that's the file. Now while using this, what is the I have defined already insert row as so first argument takes in a table name, because we have two tables. One is state table, another is news table. Okay, so in news table we are trying to insert headline and the hyperlink. Let me just call it as a link. So here we are passing this entire thing as one parameter. So you can look at this as a tuple. So this is a tuple. In this tuple I am passing date, because the date is one which I do not want it to be multiple for single link. Okay, so here it can be duplicate, date can be duplicate because in the same date we get a lot of news. So here I'm not making date as a unique constraint. Here the unique constraint that I'm making is this link, because I do not want multiple same news to be in multiple columns. Okay, so date is one of the items in tuple. Tuple, we have seen that in first few classes, tuple is nothing but a data type similar to list, but it is immutable. That means you cannot modify that. So this is one of the examples where you can use tuples. So link is one of the values inside tuple, and then headline. So this is the same thing that we sent on the mail. So these three things I am going to insert in my database. So where is the database running? Right now it is in the same system, and we are going to connect to it, and then we are going to insert the rows. So let us see whether this gets inserted. Okay, and then to make sure that whether it is inserted or not, then I have written a function called as get rows. So it simply takes the column name and it shoots a command something called as select. So select star from the table name. So this is like formatting the string. So you can pass if you are making a string with variables, you can use this format. Okay, of course you can find out in the internet. So just to make sure that you understand, you need to write programs to get used to this, but if you are able to read, that's good enough, because you don't write line by line, you just copy paste things and then knit into our requirement. Okay, so this is the variable, and in this variable I'm sending the actual parameters. So the command is select from this table name. So table name just takes the table name and lists out all the entries in the table that we have created. So now we will insert row by row all the news that is reported for today, and then let us see how it looks. Okay, so let me run the program. So this is the same program that we wrote. I'm just inserting this database. Okay, maximize this. Triggering COVID mail service. Okay, getting API from data. It is collecting news. Now it is trying to. It has downloaded the HTML, and it is trying to make something out of it. Okay. So now sending. I have stopped sending mail because it will bombard your inbox. So I've just commented that line. You can look at these entries, rows from state cases. So if you look at this, these are the entries that are in your database. So this is what we inserted. So select star means it selects all this one. So this date is auto generated. So yesterday this was the date. So let us look for today's news. So we can look at this. So from starting from here is what is today's news. So yesterday's news, I had run this program, so there is already yesterday's news, and this is today's news. So you can anytime now you can write code to extract instead of using select star here. Let me just try to see here. Instead of get rows, instead of select star, what I can do is select star from, there are different commands you need to like look at those commands. Select from this table where date is today's date, or date is on certain this one. So let us try to do that. If I think we have time, let us try to just display today's news. SQL 3 Python select query. Okay. Select from. So you just need to understand the concept, and then priority, okay, something like from table where priorities. Okay. So where is the key? So I'm just, because I don't remember the commands from this table, I'm going to just do where what is the thing that I require, where date is this. Where I need to specify the what is this called in the table. This is called, while creating table, day, where day is equal to, let me try out that, where day is equal to, I'm just hard coding this right now, we can change it. I hope this works. Okay. So I don't need to run the whole program, as we saw that we can actually get into each one of this program, and then now I can do Python, this folder name is db excuse me, db handle.py. So if I run this, what it does is it runs this creation, and since the table is already created, it will be handled, and my expectation is it should display only get rows for today, which I'm calling it here. Okay, I'm just calling it outside. Let's see whether the comment is right or not. Oh, right, it is working. That means what I've done is, yes, we do not have news from previous date. Okay, now I can in fact write a different function, or I can even okay. So this is how you kind of write queries. So in fact you can send this as a parameter, and then in order to handle this parameter, just use something like this, um, date, or this date, some variable, okay, some variable, and you can use here instead of this, you can use percentages. It's just like our printf and scanf in C programming. So you just use percentages, and then you give the variable here. Okay. So you can, in fact, number of rows is not required. You can give send it as a parameter. This date is a parameter, and you can use the same command here. Instead of just news, you just need to provide today's date. That date format we need to remember. What is the date today? So today is, copy this and paste it here. Okay, just comment this. So this is today's. So we are just trying to make it as a variable. Now we have inserted the row in this line while processing the news. Insert row, and inside this it takes these parameters and creates a command. So that command is created insert in the inside row, and then it shoots the command, and then finishes off with the execution. That c dot cursor dot execute will shoot the command. So I have to pass the table name. Table name is news. News takes in this. Let me check now. Rows from state cases, get rows. Did I do anything wrong? Okay. 26, where day is percentage s. Okay, table this date. Let me try to print the command. So this is nothing but a string. Command state or state cases. Row from state case. It's not printed. Did I save it? Okay. Get rows from state cases. Cursor, db name. Why is this not getting printed? Did I do any mistake here? Import from ptp, import set trace, then they just fit into that. Okay, I'm here. I shoot the command. Oh, sorry. I'm printing some other variable. That's typo, where day is equal to this. Is it inserted? Mhm. Yeah, from news, where day is this, which is actually correct. Okay, let me just try to change this and see if select star is coming. For I in rows. Mm, okay, I can use it here. Let me just rows from. Okay, I think the row, or maybe it is using some other database. Okay. Okay, I'm running it from different. Once I run this, I need to specify the database. Anyways, what I'll do is instead of doing all this circus, I'll just do get news. I'll just send today's new parameter here so that I get only today's news. Okay, this should work because okay, I'll tell you what is the problem. TP and connect this as well. Run main. Let it connect and try to insert. So now we should not see any duplicate links because we disallow duplicate links. So that is constraint in this particular table. Let it run. Okay. URL is unique here. Here date is unique. So that is how I have designed it right now. So once you have this, data, you can play around with that. Get throws. I think hard coding work the variable. Okay, let us debug it later. That's not a problem. Let us not spend much time on that. So idea is yeah, you got it right. So we hard coded it here. So we can run specific commands. So you can select specific rows containing a particular date. So that we did, but we are trying to pass it as a variable and it's not working. Maybe there is some small mistake which I'll debug it later. Okay, so that is how you kind of connect to database and extract the data out of it. So there is actually if you do not have any idea about database, this is actually a little bit too much to consume in one shot. So what you need to understand is first thing, we store the data in files. Okay. Second thing is once you store it in data files, what is the problem? There is no particular level of access. For example, in if you want to just give out only few pages from your book to your friend, so it's like passing the whole book and asking him to take only few pages just on trust. Okay, so that is the problem. So that is why you keep there are several softwares which host this kind of activity. That means you can have all the data in your file, but only data is served which he is authorized. That means your friend can only look at the pages or only if you give him access. So that is why we have come up with databases. Now those databases are hosted in another server. That is because of security reasons, because your code and all these things should not be in the same system. It poses different security problems, but most of your development systems might be running in the same system. That is not a problem because only you are using it. The reason that you need a server to host this is to make sure that the code is actually serving you only the part of the database. That means only few of those. For example, if we are trying to select only today's news from this database, so I do not need the entire table from the news table. I only need maybe few rows from that. So that is why we need a server. So server makes sure that you have access and you can do all this kind of partitioned activity. So from the file we have moved to server, and from server now we also saw how do we in a typical day-to-day life without coding, you can operate on the database just like this. So you open the terminal, you log into a system, and then you kind of run commands. Okay, so these are SQL commands. So why there are SQL commands is to make sure that your server understands those commands and makes an action, just like you're inserting rows in your Excel sheet. Similarly, it inserts the row and with different constraints. So constraints are maybe one table is related to another table, and you need to kind of link it to those tables and things like that. So that is why you require another software which does all these things. So these all the softwares are like PostgreSQL, MySQL, and all these database vendors. And in order to connect it manually, you need to log in. In order to connect it through the code, you need a driver. So that is how you kind of create the drivers. That means somebody has written code to automate this. Like I have logged into this MySQL terminal, right? So similarly, from the code you can log in, but this terminal won't be visible. You will get a variable. So that variable is nothing but this particular thing called as cursor. You connect to a database, log into a database. There is a cursor. From that cursor, you shoot commands. Okay, this is how you use database using Python. Okay, so this code I'll share it on GitHub. You can play around with this particular code. So database is like first step in order to do the data analytics. So in fact, we can take this data and maybe we'll draw a graph, like okay, how the COVID active cases are increasing or decreasing. What is the trend for a particular state or our entire country? So that we will try to do it tomorrow. So I'm checking out which libraries can be used. So that is about the data analytics part. So that is just drawing graphs. But in fact, if you are interested to learn about all this machine learning and all these things, so they will have a huge database and they will shoot particular queries. Say for example, there are like millions of tweets every day. So out of these tweets, you just need to select some tweets which are containing, say, something like presidential elections or Indian elections, or only those tweets. You kind of store it into a database, and then you extract only those particular tweets, and then maybe you can write a code, a logic on top of that to analyze. That is called as sentiment analysis. That means how generally that people are thinking about elections or who is going to win and things like that. Okay, so all these things can be done. So the first step is to store the data in your database so that you can do a lot of interesting things out of that data. So that is not different. That depends on what you want to do. So first thing is to have the all the data that is required in the database. That is what we have done. So this is like basic thing. So you can use this in your automation reports. You can just use this code to insert particular rows from your automation system, and you can also go back to your maybe in the last year some automation was it has found some bug, and you need to look back. You can write code for that, or you can just simply log into database and look into that particular data. So the entire world is now making money out of this. All the software companies are data intensive. That is why there are a lot of databases. So to give brief about other databases, so this is just the database that sits on your hard disk. There are also databases which can sit on your RAM. So usually, for example, there are like millions of tweets or billions of tweets. You cannot store everything in a database for every access. So maybe you kind of create a cache. So these kind of caches are created using databases. You might have heard about MongoDB, RedisDB, and all these databases. That is a secondary database. So from your actual database, some of the data will be put into your cache, that is a Redis or MongoDB or whatever it is, and then from there the data is ready for quick accesses, because going into hard disk and fetching the data is like you go to the vegetable market and getting the vegetables. This is just like you get the vegetables just from your vendor. So that is why these databases are used. These databases are called as in-memory databases. So in fact, you can use SQLite as a in-memory database. There is some way to use that. So that depends on how big your data is. Say for thousands and maybe 1 lakh, it doesn't matter so much. But once it exceeds 10 lakhs, then it goes into crores of rows. Imagine that you have 1 crore rows in your Excel sheet. It is difficult to find out data just by doing Control F and finding out data. So in such cases, you need to that's a different subject, how to access data and stuff like that. So that is about briefly about introduction about what is happening in outside world with this database. So in order to do that, you need to first thing is to understand how the databases are hosted and how we connect connect to the database using the code, and from the code how do we shoot the SQL queries. So if your database is not based on SQL, is a because concept is the same thing. You don't send commands like this. There are different commands maybe. Okay. So usually it will be SQL. All of this PostgreSQL, SQLite, DB, and MySQL. All these are SQL based. That means sequential query language. Okay. So that is all I had about databases. So I'll share this code. Take a look. It takes some time because um, if you're new to database, you need to learn about prerequisite about like how the shell commands work. That means how the commands on actually this SQL terminal works, and then you need to realize that from the code. So it takes some time, but this is how you get started with all these things. Okay. So that's all I had, guys. So any questions you can ask me.